We've all seen it. The trope of both women impulsively overspending and men being so bad at shopping that they ruin holidays. But is this truth or just another weird history myth we can't seem to shake? We are bombarded with the assumption that women are just naturally inclined to enjoy shopping. Long hours spent agonizing or reveling in choosing just the right outfit, paint color, or sofa, while men sit on their phones to dull the boredom of waiting. The fascinating thing is that it wasn't always like that. Even just a few centuries ago, interest in fashion and time spent on shopping was dependent on class, not gender, which means we had to convince an entire society that something is not only true, but inherently true, and has always been and will always be true, which takes an immense amount of cultural change. And I want to know how that happened. But first, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Love and Pies. As the weather gets colder, I have been increasingly in need of some seriously cozy game time. Love and Pies is a fun puzzle game where you get to uncover town mysteries while rebuilding a family cafe after a mysterious fire. It's full of gorgeous graphics and adorable characters. You match up different ingredients to fill customers' orders and move forward in the story. You also earn upgrades in the shop as you go, expanding into new areas to repair. Each room has different options, so you get to decorate in your favorite colors and style. Construction always digs up a few new questions, and maybe a few new characters, which I suppose is always the case with any renovations, but these are at least always fun discoveries. There's also all sorts of extra special events planned out. Starting on December 15th is a new winter-themed album where you can collect sticker packs to fill out scenes crafted by a guest artist. It's the perfect way to spend a snowy day, whether it's outside or in the game. I keep picking it up between work around the house to give my body and my brain a little break here and there. So if you want a little seasonal cozy time and some baking, download Love and Pies now with my link below. One of the earliest examples of this belief can be traced back to Rousseau, a philosopher of the Enlightenment who wrote in 1762 that little girls love everything visual, mirrors, jewels, cloth, thus presenting that it was not a process of education or even cultural influence, but something that women are born with and that men are not. But one man's ideas would not be enough to convince everyone. So how did this idea grow from a small seed to wrap its roots so deeply in our society that we still wrestle with it? I figured that first, a few important changes needed to take place. Overconsuming was originally a stereotypical problem for the rich, after all. They have the extra money and time for excessive luxury. If we go back far enough, there just isn't as widespread of an availability of large quantities of desirable goods that aren't also functional. That's not to say that functional things couldn't be beautiful or well made, but the sheer availability, both in a physical sense and a monetary one, had to grow large enough to be a major concern for more than just the very wealthy. So, 1, how did consumerism for the average person come into being? 2, women had to be assigned the task of being the shopper for the household. With all of the new and less necessary things appearing, who decided it would be their standard task? After all, men were the ones who were out of the home every day, making the money. Why would women be the ones to leave their household tasks behind to go spend it? Answering both of these questions should lead us to the big one. How did the idea of women having an obsession with over-shopping take hold? The concern had to be beneficial to someone, otherwise it wouldn't have mattered. And not just in the we don't have money to spend budget sense. After all, there was a time well before credit as we know it was standard, and as I've talked about before, women had limited access to that without the permission of husband or father. Men had every legal right to control the budget. And yet. So let's start with the spread of consumerism. This was not just a result of the Industrial Revolution, despite what we were mostly taught in school. It started up well before. As of the 17th century, international trade and the amassing of manufacturers in industrial regions was heavily encouraged and even subsidized by governments. Not surprisingly, with that help, it all grew quickly, and things like India-printed cottons and porcelain from China found their way into the average European home. While this did begin to change our relationship to stuff, it was not a shift from extreme Puritan ideology of self-denial as salvation to overconsumption and hedonism. There was still an avoidance of luxury and its connection to corruption. Just think of all the political revolutions against monarchies that took place in the late 18th century and onwards. Consumerism could not be placed in an entirely negative light. The government, the wealthy, and tradespeople needed the growing level of importation and manufacturing to have consumers who kept pace. It just had to be framed as progress and growth, both for the individual and society. Obviously, partaking in the manufacture or consumption of domestic goods helped to support local economies. And even though exporting goods was the ideal, bringing in money on a national scale, there was benefit in importing as well, whatever kept the trade system running. I mean, often these new fashions and technologies would arrive from distant ports on ships that were carrying large quantities of raw goods and just needed a little bit more to fill the space and provide ballast. So how did they convince the average person to start filling their life with these slightly less necessary things? While luxury was corruption, it was still an ideal to be polite and genteel, to offer comfort and sociability. If money is spent investing in the home, the family, and society, it is not being spent on vice, immorality, and bad habits. Purchasing imported, fashionable goods was connected to being worldly and knowledgeable. Simply knowing what to buy means being aware of global manufacturing, quality, innovation, and culture. A visiting guest would experience the hospitality a well-outfitted home could provide, and leave with a sense of respect for their education. Increasingly important as the middle class began to congeal and distinguish itself from the lower, not just in how they looked, but in how they acted. Most importantly, because of all of this, consumerism was considered civilizing. It elevated all of those who participated properly, even more important at a time of colonialism. The excuse of bringing civility to distant peoples through goods and etiquette that was meant to obscure the violent acquisitions of resources. By participating in rituals like afternoon tea, sports, fashion, and even lawns, people could improve their quality of life, improve their status, their morality, and their society. Of course, it all required shopping. Lots and lots of it. But again, to spend money on building out a comfortable and genteel home to raise a family and welcome guests was a positive thing, and far better than many of the other ways that money could have been squandered. Consumerism was given a slight tweak that brought it into the modern world without competing against morality. In much the same way, women's role as consumers would also be assigned a positive spin. If the household was to be split into increasingly separate spheres, where men worked outside of the house and women worked inside, managing the home, it's no surprise that it slowly acquired a shortened version of earner and spender. Household economies where everyone was part of the work that earned money was much more standard prior to that. But having the wife not work in an official capacity was part of what qualified as middle class. Of course, an equal amount of work managing the house, with or without servants, still happened, especially as household demands continue to grow. It wasn't that women were simply told, stop doing the trades that you were trained to do, get married, and stay home forever unable to actually do anything but have children. That wouldn't have gone over terribly well, even centuries ago. Instead, the idea was that women are better suited for some work than men are. They will be happier and have an easier time if they focus on those aspects. And that range is, of course, equally important to the work that men do. Women were presented not just as the natural caretakers, but as instructors and civilizers. Having a wife would mellow out a man's aggressive or erratic tendencies. She would raise children that would be the future of society with education and empathy beyond what her generation had. In this way, women were taught that they had the true power. They, in secret and subtle ways, would shape the outside world. Thus, their morality and purity were essential. Women were assigned the role of shopper because of their role taking care of the household and elevating it. It became a delicate balance between buying enough and buying too much. On one hand, the household and its appearance was absolutely key to social life and societal expectations. Failing at the care of the home, whether through cleanliness, comfort of guests, or the outward appearance of both the house and its residents, was the first step in the downfall of society, after all. Not only did all of that reflect back on the monetary status of the entire family, especially the men, but if the women, children, and household weren't visibly upholding proper moral values, they certainly weren't doing so in less visible ways. So it wasn't just buy nice things to look middle class so no one treats you like you are lower class, or even buy fancy things to mimic the upper class. It was an effort for the middle class to show their literal morality. Before we had etiquette books booming in the 19th century, as I've talked about before, the earliest courtesy books, also aimed at the middle class, replaced the ideal life of a lavish aristocrat with a woman of moral value, spiritual depth, and passive virtues. Modesty was not a matter of how much skin you covered, that's a 20th century invention, but of humility, discretion, frugality, and industriousness. Being refined rather than vulgar. Elevate your family and surroundings through collecting the right things to support and educate them. Something that was increasingly easy to do as department stores, catalogs, and new types of transport showed up. The latest fashions for home and clothing were often, even in the 19th century, based on styles coming from all over the world and technology that was propelling the progress of society. A concept that has stuck with us still today, whether it's skincare from Korea making us all look younger, memory foam invented for astronauts helping us all feel better, stain-resistant fabrics keeping us from spending so much time doing laundry, or electric vehicles helping us to save the environment. Things that start out as luxuries, but because they are framed as making your life easier and better, maybe even the world better, as they reach an achievable price, they become a standard. Filling the house with carved walnut furniture and silk brocades was not necessarily a luxury to the 19th century. In fact, an obsession with luxury, whether actually acquired or just yearned for, was attributed to those who were weak. It was the curse of the effeminate and poor. Hints on where we are headed in this. Pious materialism, on the other hand, elevates living standards, moral, and economic progress. So now that we know how consumerism and women's household responsibilities took shape, it's time to see how things went from an assigned moral activity to one fraught with danger. First, as women took on their assigned role of keeper of the household, a few things needed to change to make it possible. General stores were plenty common, but they were limited to the smaller range of goods based on their physical size. Daily needs were taken care of, but a massive range of imported, fashionable, and elevated items wouldn't be practical to have in large quantities. That would require a lot of different shops, and not all smaller towns could support that. So instead, people would travel into larger cities. The problem was that women had nowhere to go. Literally. Travel hours to get there, hop from small shop to shop, but there were no appropriate restrooms or restaurants for women traveling alone. even as of the mid-19th century. When department stores took up that call, they created a space aimed specifically at women's needs, a location where they could spend most of the day and hopefully end up walking away with a few extra items. Catalogs, often from the same stores, began to arrive in the mail to those who couldn't make the longer trip. A range of newly available items, easily accessible with achievable prices or even options for credit, was aimed directly at women. Printing, particularly with images, got cheap enough to start putting out monthly or even weekly magazines filled with vivid advertisements offering to send free catalogs. It turns out consumerism could actually be power. Just like they had promised when women were pushed into the private sphere, the purchasing of goods would change both the household and the economy. We literally built an entire range of infrastructure to support it. In the second half of the century, women took up this offer more and more. They engaged in community-driven events, formed women's-only clubs, took up sports and activities like bicycle riding, and most importantly, they started demanding rights like voting. Even when women were sticking to the morally good activities they were told they were the best at, caring for others, shaping their environments to cultivate and educate, advancing society through their family, they were now doing so a little too successfully. If women could manage the budget, the house, and now volunteer work and societal groups and so much more, why wouldn't they be intelligent enough to vote or even run for office? Now, it's not like these concerns popped up overnight. There's plenty of early 19th century examples of women arguing for more rights and freedoms. So a sort of fail-safe had been built into the changes taking form. Back to Rousseau's belief that women were overly interested by a pretty thing. Women's tendency to be easily swayed came from their desire to be helpful. That same kind nature was said to leave them vulnerable. Relying on emotion rather than logic helped in raising a family, but certainly not in the world of business and politics. Rather than seeing the power women wielded in the growth of consumerism as a positive thing, helping to grow the economy, it was framed as a dangerous one. They would be easily convinced by advertisements and temptations with such simple minds. Adding on that women were not the only group portrayed as infantile in their emotional state and prone to spending money on inappropriate things. Working class and minorities also had the same argument levied against their efforts to gain basic rights and freedoms. If they can't manage to control their emotional urges and guide their decisions properly in such simple things as shopping, how would they ever be trusted with things like voting? They need someone to help and guide them away from such terrible influences. It's a stereotype that could be used in so many situations against a wide range of people. Throughout the 20th century, women kept being redirected back to their prescribed place in managing the home, regardless of war or other events that took them out of it. But that work continued to include making the purchases for the family. Clothing, machinery, decor, food, supplies, and more all fell under her purview. Of course, that's not to say that men weren't also spending money on plenty of things. Those were just often framed as investments. Gesturing back to the video on the history of hobbies, where many of these popular activities were framed as productive parts of an individual's time and society's advancement. Of course, anyone can be frugal or be liberal in their spending, regardless of their demographics. And it's pretty impossible to actually calculate what is valid spending, investing in things appropriately, and what is overspending on things that aren't actually needed. The economy doesn't measure unpaid labor or benefits like education as an adult, or even keeping your mind and body healthy. And we certainly still can't answer whether consumerism is empowering or simply mind control. Are we influenced to buy, or do we exert our influence in that transaction? Victim or manipulator? Women have just long been the focus because of the role that shopping has played both in their expected responsibilities and in the ones that would have been demanded. It doesn't help that shopping has thus become a sign of being effeminate and weak, meaning so many avoid any association with it as a sign of elevated strength and morality. I'm not saying excessive consumerism is a good thing here, of course, just that an interest in anything shouldn't be gendered or stereotyped. Speaking of, my interest right now is in getting ready to paint these walls. And I'm starting to notice some consumerism-based trends with the 2026 colors. Pantone is about to drop their predictions, so be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for that video in a couple of weeks. So definitely stick around because I have a lot more fun things as well as a lot more things to unpack in the near future.